What would you do if a half-frozen puppy limped onto the road, stared into your headlights, and led you straight into a rescue that would change an entire town forever? The wind howled like a wounded beast through the Montana mountains that night, curling through pine trees and stripping warmth from anything foolish enough to linger. Snow blanketed Timber Ridge in thick silence, muting the crunch of boots and burying every path, every mistake, every cry for help. But one cry made it through. It wasn't loud. It wasn't human. It was a bark sharp, desperate, cracking from lungs too young to bear the weight of winter, and it came from a pup barely 3 months old, standing alone in the middle of Route 49. He didn't run. He didn't whimper. He stood his ground, legs trembling, eyes wide not with fear, but with purpose. He was barking for someone who couldn't call for help anymore. Her name would later be known as Willow, but right now, she was nothing more than a shadow in the forest. A mother German shepherd, her body broken in a trap set by hands that cared nothing for life. The pup's name would become Shadow, fitting in ways no one could yet understand. Because that night, under a silver sky and a world gone numb with cold, Shadow stood in the path of headlights and refused to move. Jack Dalton was used to silence. It had followed him ever since the day he lost his partner. 3 months ago, a federal raid had gone sideways. Officer Travis Mercer took the bullet. Jack lived. The investigation was still ongoing, but in the court of guilt, Jack had already served a lifetime. That night, he wasn't headed anywhere. Just driving. A grey Dodge Charger on an empty mountain road, tires humming low beneath him, engine running like a broken heartbeat. His badge wasn't on his chest anymore, but it was still in his bones. Jack looked the part of a man worn thin, wind-burned face, stubble days old, dark blonde hair flecked with early grey. He wore a faded flannel over a black thermal, jeans stiff from cold, boots made for survival more than comfort, and maybe, just maybe, fate still believed in redemption, because that's when the dog appeared. A flash of black and tan fur leapt into the road, directly into Jack's headlights. He slammed the brakes. The Charger slid slightly before stopping. Jack's breath caught in his chest. The pup didn't move. "God," he muttered, shoving open the door. Snow slapped his face as he stepped out, boots crunching into the powder. He reached for the flashlight on his belt habit, muscle memory, even if the badge was gone. The pup stood still. A German shepherd, maybe 12 weeks old, body tense, tail stiff. Snow clung to his paws and belly, and his breathing came in short, sharp puffs. But his eyes amber and wild-locked with Jack's, filled with a kind of silent scream. Jack knelt slowly, voice low. "Hey there, buddy." The pup didn't growl, didn't bark. He lunged, not to bite, but to grab the hem of Jack's coat between his teeth. He tugged. Then he barked a cracked, broken sound and tugged again. "You're trying to lead me somewhere," Jack said, stunned. Another bark. Another tug. Then the pup turned and darted into the trees, pausing only to glance back. Jack stared at the dark wall of forest. Snow was falling harder now, thick flakes sticking to his lashes. He looked at the road, then back at the forest. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered, and followed. The slope was steep. The cold bit deeper with every step. Jack grabbed the flashlight from his car and pushed through the underbrush, following flashes of fur and the brief glint of wide eyes in the beam's edge. Shadow would run ahead 20 feet, maybe more, then stop, look back, and wait. Then run again. The deeper they went, the darker it became. Pines closed in above like cathedral ceilings, swallowing what little moonlight remained. That's when Jack heard it. A sound no dog should ever make. A whimper not from a pup, but something older, hurt, fading. Jack quickened his pace, heart pounding. Shadow had stopped beside a thicket. Behind it, barely visible in the beam of Jack's light, lay Willow, She was older, full-grown, beautiful, even beneath the dirt and blood. But her hind leg, mangled, grotesquely twisted, was caught in the rusted steel jaws of an old hunting trap. Her ribs showed through her coat. Her breathing was shallow, ragged. Snow had gathered on her muzzle, and she made no sound. None at all, except when Shadow rushed to her side, licking her ear, whining frantically. She lifted her head slightly. "That's all." Jack dropped to his knees. "Jesus!" The trap was old, brutal, illegal in this state for 2 years. Jack scanned the snow. No human tracks, but snow could cover anything. He pulled a multi-tool from his belt, fingers already numb. The trap groaned as he worked it loose. Willow didn't fight. She didn't flinch. She had nothing left, except trust. When the trap finally snapped open, Jack wrapped her leg in his flannel, whispering words even he didn't fully understand. Shadow curled against her side. Jack pulled the emergency blanket from his pack, covering them both. He looked down at the pup, still alert, still watching. "You did good," Jack said softly. "You saved her." Above them, the wind whispered through the trees, and deep in the heart of Timber Ridge, a man who had lost everything felt a flicker of something return. Not duty, not pride, purpose. The wind never stopped in Timber Ridge. It slithered between the trees and howled through broken branches like the cry of something ancient and angry. Snow continued falling, thickening into a silent storm that blurred the world to white. But in that small pocket of forest, beneath a canopy of ice-draped pines, Jack Dalton didn't feel the cold anymore. He was kneeling in the snow, his breath coming in ragged clouds, his hands raw and shaking. In front of him lay Willow, the injured mother dog, her hind leg freshly freed from a steel hunting trap. The bone beneath the fur looked wrong-swollen, twisted, dark with internal bleeding. She didn't resist when he moved her. She didn't even flinch when he wrapped the wound with his flannel shirt and cinched it tight with duct tape from his emergency kit. She just looked at him, eyes dull from exhaustion, but still holding something ancient, something like thanks, something like trust. And beside her, curled close, was Shadow, the little German shepherd pup who had led Jack through a snowstorm and into something he hadn't felt in months. Purpose. Jack reached into his backpack and pulled out a thermal blanket. It was standard issue from his police days, stuffed at the bottom of every patrol kit in case of hypothermia or blood loss. Tonight, it became something more. A cocoon. A promise. He draped it over both dogs, tucking it around Willow's trembling body and letting Shadow burrow into the crook of her belly. The pup was still alert, still on edge, but his eyes had softened. He had done what he set out to do. He had found help. Jack exhaled, breath frosting instantly in the air. And for a moment, he just sat there, knees buried in snow, head tilted back against a tree trunk, his eyes toward a sky he could barely see. Then the cold caught up. He blinked hard and stood, wincing as his knees cracked. He pulled out his phone. No signal, not a bar, not a flicker. He cursed softly and looked uphill toward the road. There was no way he'd get Willow back up that steep incline, not with her leg shattered, not in this weather. The Charger was at least a half-mile away now, and the forest was only getting darker. But Jack hadn't been a cop for 15 years without backup plans. He dug into his jacket pocket and pulled out a weather-beaten satellite radio, his old field unit from patrol days, the kind no one bothered to carry anymore. It was scratched, temperamental, but had saved his life more than once. He flipped it on. Static. He adjusted the dial, pressed the distress frequency, then click. A voice. "Ranger Ops." "Identify." Jack pressed the transmit button. "Officer Jack Dalton, Timber Ridge PD, off duty. I've got a badly injured German Shepherd adult female, pup unharmed, found in an illegal trap about a half-mile south of Route 49. No transport. No cellular coverage. Possible poacher activity nearby.
Request immediate vet and wildlife response. Silence. Then, copy that, Officer Dalton.
Vet team and rescue dispatch ETA 35 minutes. Hold position. Can you provide coordinates? Jack tapped his GPS watch, rattled off a rough location. Coordinates received.
Stay put. We're coming. He clicked off the radio, clipped it to his belt, and turned back toward the dogs. That's when he noticed it. Footprints. Not paw prints, boot prints. They trailed off from the spot where the trap had been set. Wide, deep, staggered.
Someone had paced here, stood, knelt. Jack knelt to examine them. Even half covered in snow, the pattern was unmistakable. A man, maybe 200 pounds, and not just passing through. This trap wasn't forgotten. It had been checked, maintained, baited. Maybe even reset recently. Jack's pulse kicked up. This wasn't just a random leftover trap from some old hunter. Someone was setting these, maybe systematically, maybe with intent. That meant danger, not just to animals, to hikers, kids, anyone walking too close. He looked back at Willow, and then at Shadow. "You didn't just bring me out here to save her, did you?" Jack murmured. "Maybe you saved a lot more." A low sound broke the silence. Not a bark, not a whimper. A growl, deep, feral, close. Jack turned slowly, flashlight sweeping through the trees, and their two glowing green eyes stared back at him. A wolf. At least one. Maybe more. Drawn by blood. Drawn by weakness. Jack stood tall, shoulders squared, but his sidearm was locked in the glove box of his car. He cursed under his breath. Stupid. Another growl. Closer now, and then movement, but not from the trees, from the pup. Shadow stepped forward. This tiny scrap of fur and defiance, barely the size of a bread loaf, placed himself between Jack and the dark. His body stiffened, his back arched, and from somewhere deep in his throat came a growl. Wobbly at first, then stronger and stronger. It was a sound that didn't belong to a pup. It belonged to a guardian, to a sentinel. Behind him, Willow lifted her head. Weakly she joined him. Another low, trembling growl. The forest paused, the wind shifted, and just like that, the wolf's eyes vanished. No more sound, no more threat. Only silence. Jack slowly lowered his flashlight. His heart still pounded, but the adrenaline faded as awe took its place. "You're not just a puppy," he whispered. "You're a damn soldier." Shadow turned, tail still stiff, and looked up at him with eyes far older than 3 months. Jack dropped to his knees and pulled the pup into his lap. At first, Shadow struggled uncertain, still on alert. But then he pressed against Jack's chest and let out a breath. Half exhaustion, half relief. Far off in the distance, the faint hum of an engine grew louder. The rescue team was coming, but something else had already arrived. In a frozen forest, where life and death often passed like ghosts in the trees, a bond had been forged. Between man and animal, between pain and purpose. And for the first time in months, Jack Dalton didn't feel alone. The rescue team arrived 30 minutes later, though it felt like hours. Headlights cut through the trees like searchlights through fog. The hum of engines grew louder until tires crunched to a stop near the trailhead. 2 rangers and a wildlife medic moved quickly, wrapped in heavy parkas and speaking in clipped, focused tones. Jack Dalton didn't leave the dogs. He didn't need to wave or shout. They found him because of Shadow. The little German shepherd pup stood alert beside his mother, his thin body framed against the snow, ears perked like a soldier standing at post. He didn't bark. He didn't flinch. He just waited, watching the forest, guarding the silence. The medic examined Willow, her face pinched with concern as she unwrapped Jack's flannel bandage and inspected the wound beneath. She spoke to Jack quietly, out of respect, like people do when they know they've stumbled into something sacred. "She's stable for now," the medic said. "But that leg, the damage is bad. If we wait too long, infection will set in. Jack nodded. He didn't speak. He just watched Shadow. The pup hadn't moved. His eyes flicked between the trees, like he still expected danger to return. Snow clung to his muzzle. His ribs showed through his fur. But there was no fear in Himmenly Fire. Once the sled was prepped, the team moved fast. They loaded Willow gently onto a padded platform, securing her body with fleece straps and extra blankets. That's when Shadow panicked. The moment his mother was lifted off the ground, he darted forward, tail down, barking hoarsely, eyes wide. His paws scraped against the sled as he tried to climb on beside her. One of the rangers stepped forward to block him, just a gentle motion. Big mistake. Shadow snarled. Not like a puppy. Like a wolf. Teeth bared, ears flat, body coiled like a spring. Jack stepped between them. Easy. He's not trying to hurt you. He's just not leaving her. Shadow whined, then lunged again, this time toward Jack's chest. He buried his face into Jack's coat, trembling. Jack knelt and wrapped both arms around the pup. It's okay, buddy. She's okay. You did your job. Let us take it from here. But Shadow wouldn't be left behind. So Jack made a call. Put them both in the sled, he told the medic. He goes with her. The woman hesitated, then nodded. A few minutes later, the sled glided down the trail, led by the rangers on snowshoes. The team's truck waited a mile away, ready to transport Willow to the Timber Ridge Wildlife Rehabilitation Center. Jack followed behind on foot, boots crunching through ice, flashlight in hand. The snowfall had slowed. The storm was passing, but the memory of that growl, that stance, that line drawn in the snow by a puppy, stayed with him. The center sat on the edge of town, a modest facility with medical rooms, kennels, and one aging surgery suite. Staffed mostly by volunteers, it was never flashy. But it had heart. Dr. Nora Whitman, the center's director, met them at the back entrance. She was in her 50s, with cropped silver-black hair, sharp eyes, and a quiet strength that filled a room. She goes into surgery now, Doctor, Whitman said, and she's going to need everything we've got. Jack nodded. Shadow didn't. When the stretcher rolled toward the operating room, Shadow followed until he hit the swinging double doors. They closed in front of him, and he howled. It wasn't the bark of a dog left alone. It was a cry full of heartbreak and fury, a sound so raw it silenced the whole clinic. Jack stood at the glass wall of the observation room, watching as Shadow scratched the floor, pushed against the door, and circled restlessly. A vet tech brought in food and a blanket. Shadow ignored them. 10 minutes passed, then 20, and when no one came to open the door, he stopped barking. He just lay down, his small frame pressed against the glass nose against the door frame, eyes fixed on the room his mother had disappeared into. Jack stayed with him. Didn't ask for coffee. Didn't sit on the cot a nurse brought over. He sat on the floor beside Shadow, his back to the wall, listening to the quiet hum of machines. Because he'd been there, too. Pressed against a door that never opened again. The night his partner Travis had died, Jack had stood outside the trauma bay for hours, watching, hoping, breaking. He recognized the sound Shadow made now. It wasn't a dog missing its kin. It was the sound of someone who had already known loss and wasn't ready to feel it again. Later that night, Officer Riley Moore walked into the center with a case file in hand. She was young, sharp-eyed, with a tight braid under her hood and frost still clinging to her boots. Riley had once been a veterinary student until tragedy turned her toward law enforcement. Tonight, her instincts brought her straight to Jack. I pulled every open poaching file in the region, she said, setting the folder down beside him. One of them has your name on it, a name I think you'll remember. Jack looked up, brow furrowed. Riley flipped the folder open to reveal a grainy surveillance photo. A man crouching beneath a pine tree, setting a trap. Ray Sutter. Jack's face darkened. He remembered that name, a convicted poacher. The kind that didn't just kill animals but made them suffer first. Jack had arrested him in 2016, testified in court, pushed for the full sentence. He did 4 years, Riley said. Got out last fall, off the grid since, but he's been seen near the ridge. Jack looked through the glass at Shadow, still lying in front of the recovery room. He's back, Jack said softly, and he's leaving traps again. That night, Jack didn't sleep. He stayed beside Shadow. And when the pup finally moved, crawling into Jack's lap and pressing his face into his chest, Jack did something he hadn't done in a long time. He held on. Dawn broke like a bruise over Timber Ridge. No sunlight. Just a dull, aching grey that stretched across the forest like a shroud. Frost coated every pine needle, and the wind had gone quiet, too quiet. That kind of silence that didn't feel peaceful. That kind of silence that made Jack Dalton's skin tighten beneath his coat. Inside the Timber Ridge Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, the world was holding its breath. Willow was still in surgery. Shadow was still curled outside the recovery room door, nose pressed to the glass, eyes hollow from exhaustion. And Jack hadn't left his side. In another part of town, Officer Riley Moore sat hunched over a monitor in the Timber Ridge Police Department. A grainy trail cam image flickered on screen. A figure in camouflage setting a metallic object beneath a pine tree. Ray Sutter, the man Jack had arrested nearly a decade ago. The poacher with dead eyes and a crooked smile. He was back. And this time, he wasn't just hunting animals. He was baiting the forest with suffering. Setting traps not for food, but for power, for control, for cruelty. Riley slammed the folder shut and grabbed her parka. By the time she reached the center, Willow was out of surgery. Doctor. Nora Whitman, sleeves rolled, hands scrubbed raw, delivered the verdict with clipped professionalism. She'll live, but the leg is gone. Nerve damage. No function. It's dead weight now. Jack exhaled. Not relief. Not grief. Something in between. She can adapt, Dr. Whitman added more softly. But it'll be slow, painful. Jack looked toward the glass. Shadow had moved closer. He was sitting now, upright, ears forward, eyes fixed like a statue carved from worry. She'll wake up, Jack said, and when she does, he'll be the first thing she sees. That afternoon, Jack and Riley walked the ridgeline near the original trap site. Snow was melting in places, revealing crushed ferns and deep boot prints. Riley crouched beside one, running a gloved finger along its edge. Same tread as the photos, she murmured. Same staggered pattern. Jack scanned the woods. It felt different now, like something was watching them. He was here recently, Riley said, and he wasn't just placing traps. He was pacing. Tracking, measuring, targeting, Jack added. They both fell silent. Then Riley stood and said quietly, "You need to move." That night, Jack packed up Willow and Shadow and brought them home. A log cabin tucked into the Timber Ridge foothills, built by Jack's grandfather in the 70s. No Wi-Fi. No cell signal. Just a wood stove, a filtered water tank, and a forest that never slept. Willow lay by the fireplace, her bandaged leg curled beneath her, eyes half-lidded with pain. Shadow lay beside her, unmoving, unblinking, watching her chest rise and fall like a heartbeat he didn't want to lose again. Jack sat at the kitchen table staring at the folded reinstatement papers he'd never mailed. He picked up a pen and paused. Outside, the motion sensor light flickered. Once, then again. Jack stood, walked to the door, rifle in hand, boots heavy on the floorboards. Shadow lifted his head, growled low. Jack opened the door slowly. Snow had melted to mud near the tree line, but there were prints again. Boots. Deep, deliberate. He checked the security camera, the portable one Riley had installed last week. Rewound. There he was, tall, hooded.
Moving slow, staring at the house. Ray Sutter, still watching, still hunting. Jack called Riley. "Tell me you're not just calling because you miss my coffee," she answered. "He was here." Her silence was instant. "I've got him on camera. 20 minutes ago, same jacket, same build."
Same walk? Riley swore softly. "I'll run the match. But until then—" "I know," Jack cut in. "We lock down." Inside the cabin, Shadow had risen to his paws. He stood at the window, tail stiff, body motionless. He could smell it. The scent of the man who had tried to kill his mother. The same hands that set the steel that tore her apart, and he wouldn't sleep. Not tonight. Neither would Jack. At sunrise, a frost-bitten stillness settled over the woods. Jack and Riley moved on foot through the trees, weapons holstered, eyes scanning every shadow. Shadow ran ahead, not like a pup now, but like a trained tracker. He didn't bark, didn't chase. He hunted, until he stopped. At the base of a cedar, he began to circle slow, tight loops. Then he froze, ears forward, body locked. Jack raised his radio. "Something's here." A branch cracked uphill. Riley's voice came through the comms. "Movement, 40 feet east, heavy steps." Shadow growled. Not high-pitched, not puppy-like, deep. Serious. A warning. And then he bolted. Jack sprinted after him, crashing through the brush, branches tearing at his sleeves. Riley was close behind. Ahead, a shout. Then a blur of motion. Shadow tackled a man to the ground near a rock face. Ray Sutter, bigger than expected. Beard tangled, eyes wild, a hunting knife clutched in one shaking hand. "Stay back," he snarled. Jack raised his sidearm. "Drop it!" Sutter lunged toward Shadow, and that's when the trees moved. Willow. She had followed them. On 3 legs, she limped out from behind a ridge and launched herself into Ray's side. The impact knocked him off balance enough for Shadow to dart clear. Willow didn't bark. She didn't growl. She just stood between her son and the man who had tried to destroy them. Riley arrived, seconds later. Gun raised. "Don't move." Ray turned. Too slow. Jack fired a rubber round to the shoulder. Ray hit the dirt. Cuffed. Disarmed. Defeated. Jack dropped to one knee beside Willow. Her breathing was shallow but steady. "You did it," he whispered. "You saved your son." Shadow curled beside her instantly, nose pressed to her neck. And in the cold morning light, beneath the cedar trees of Timber Ridge, a broken family stood whole again. The hardest part wasn't the blood, or the pain, or even the chase through the woods. It was the waiting. After Ray Sutter was arrested and dragged away in cuffs, the air in Timber Ridge didn't erupt in celebration. It just exhaled, slow, cautious, uncertain, because the one who had finished the fight, Willow, was now unconscious. Again. They carried her gently into the back of the wildlife unit's truck, her body limp, breath shallow, fur sticky with sweat and melting snow. Shadow refused to be separated. He leapt onto the tailgate before anyone could stop him, wedging his body against hers, head draped over her shoulder like a child clinging to their mother's hospital bed. Dr. Nora Whitman didn't protest. "She earned the ride," she said softly. So did he. Back at the Timber Ridge Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, everything moved in quiet, practiced rhythm. Willow was lifted onto a padded surgical mat. Her vitals were weak. Her wound had reopened. Even with only 3 legs, she had launched herself into a man twice her size. The strain had torn stitches, strained muscle, flared inflammation. "She might not make it through the night," Dr. Whitman said bluntly. Jack Dalton stood in the hallway, hands on hips. Jaw clenched. He hated this feeling. Not the fear, the helplessness. Shadow paced outside the recovery room door again. Same door, same glass wall, same silence. But this time, he didn't bark. He lay down, nose touching the bottom of the glass, eyes locked on the sliver of light beneath the frame. Jack sat beside him on the floor. Neither of them spoke, and yet they shared everything. Officer Riley Moore returned late that evening. She'd personally processed Sutter's arrest, stayed through the search of his remote cabin, catalogued the evidence, 26 traps, 3 collars from lost pets, a notebook filled with drawings of dogs in cages, and near the bottom of a locked drawer, a photo. Willow. From a year ago, standing on the ridge above the highway, Sutter had seen her before. He had chosen her. Riley dropped the file on the desk beside Jack. He hunted her deliberately. Jack didn't speak. Didn't even look at the photo. He was watching Shadow, and Shadow wasn't moving. That night, Timber Ridge went silent again. Snow returned, light and drifting, softening the town into stillness. The forest hushed beneath the weight of peace not yet earned. Inside the wildlife center, Shadow didn't eat. He didn't drink. Didn't blink. He just watched the door. Dr. Whitman checked on him twice. "He's going to make himself sick," she said to Jack. Jack nodded. "He's grieving. But he's also believing." Near midnight, the blinds between the observation room and the recovery suite were lifted. Willow lay beneath warming blankets, her chest rising faintly. Her head was turned toward the glass, eyes still closed, but her ears twitched at every shift of air. The staff dimmed the lights. Jack stood. Shadow didn't move. "Go to her," Jack whispered, but the pup stayed frozen. Until the door finally opened. No announcement, no grand gesture, just the soft click of a latch and the gentle sweep of air. Shadow stood, walked slowly, and crossed the threshold into the room. Inside, Willow lay still, but her body shifted. Her nose lifted. Just slightly. Shadow approached, like a soldier returning from war. Each paw step careful, each breath measured. He reached her side, paused, and then slowly laid his head across her neck. For the first time since the cabin, since the trap, since the pain. Willow opened her eyes. They didn't focus, didn't widen, but they moved toward him. She didn't lift her head, didn't wag her tail, but her ears angled, her breathing deepened, and Shadow whimpered. Not a cry, not a plea, a whisper, a confirmation. "You're still here, Doctor." Whitman watched from the door. "So that's what brought her back," she said quietly. Jack stood beside her, arms crossed. "They never broke," he murmured. "Not once." 3 days later, Willow stood on her own. She limped, her balance wobbled. Her breath caught halfway through each step. But she walked, 3 legs, full heart. Shadow walked beside her, always on the injured side as if ready to catch her if she fell. He never touched her, never guided, just matched her pace. Jack finally mailed the reinstatement form. It was accepted in 24 hours. But he requested a new role, K-9 Division. And for the first time in Timber Ridge history, a dog, without pedigree, without papers, without any formal training, was approved for candidacy. Shadow passed every test they threw at him. Tracking. Response. Obedience. Protection. But it was the loyalty that stunned the evaluators. The way he never let Jack out of sight. The way he positioned himself between strangers and Willow. The way he stood without shaking, even in a room full of noise. "He's not just responding," the trainer said. "He's thinking. He's calculating. This dog doesn't react. He decides." Jack smiled.
Sounds like someone I used to be. That spring, the snow melted for good. Pine needles peeked through thawing ground, and the town awoke with the smell of earth and sap and healing. Willow sunbathed by the cabin's front steps, eyes closed, breathing even. Her fur had filled out. Her ribs no longer showed. Shadow was taller now, stronger. He still curled beside her every night. Still checked the tree line every morning. But now he wore a badge on his collar. And Jack? He wore one on his chest again. Not out of duty. Not for redemption. But because a broken pup in the snow had shown him something he'd forgotten. That courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the presence of love, standing its ground no matter how cold the road may be. Spring had fully arrived in Timber Ridge. The cabin porch no longer groaned under snow. Birds returned to the treetops, their songs weaving through the morning like threads of light. Pine needles glistened with dew instead of frost, and for the first time in months, Jack Dalton felt like he could breathe again. Inside the cabin, Willow lay on a soft wool blanket near the hearth, her silver-grey coat thick and clean. Her injured leg remained curled beneath her, a reminder of the trap that had nearly taken her life. But her gaze was alert now. Proud. At peace. She didn't need 4 legs to command a room. She had presence. Shadow had grown taller. Lean muscle rippled under his sleek black and tan coat. His ears were always up. His eyes never missed anything, but he still slept beside his mother, still walked beside her, still paused at every doorway to let her pass first. And in the yard that surrounded the cabin, he had carved out patrol routes, silent paths he walked each dawn, circling the tree line like a sentinel. He never barked. He watched. Jack had installed new cameras, reinforced the doors, built a proper ramp for Willow to get outside. But none of that brought him as much comfort as knowing Shadow was on duty. 2 weeks after Willow's release from the Wildlife Center, the adoption paperwork arrived. Jack signed both forms at the kitchen table. One for Willow, one for Shadow. He placed them in a wooden frame on the mantel, right beside a photograph Officer Riley Moore had taken the day they returned home. It showed Jack kneeling beside Willow in the grass, one hand on her chest. Shadow sat to his left, ears high, staring directly into the camera, calm, confident, proud. Below the image, Riley had written in block print, "Not found. Chosen." At the Timber Ridge Police Department, Jack's reinstatement had become official, but this time he returned not as a patrol officer. He returned as a K-9 handler. Shadow passed his final temperament evaluation with flying colors. The trainer had simply said, "This dog isn't just loyal. He's deliberate. He knows what he's doing." Shadow wore his new collar with pride. It had a small silver badge clipped to the front, engraved with a number, K9 to 47, but Jack still just called him Kid. Some evenings, Jack and Riley sat on the cabin porch sipping black coffee while Willow rested nearby and Shadow paced the yard. "You know," Riley said one night, "this whole town's talking about them." Jack raised an eyebrow. "Not about me?" "No," she grinned. "You're just the guy lucky enough to live with them." They both laughed, then sat in comfortable silence. Behind them, Willow let out a soft sigh and closed her eyes. In front of them, Shadow stopped mid-patrol to scan the trees, as if even laughter required permission in his presence. One morning, a letter arrived from the Timber Ridge Historical Society. Inside was an invitation to a small dedication ceremony. They had built something for the town, but also for them. The statue was unveiled on a quiet afternoon beneath an old cedar tree in Riverside Memorial Park. It wasn't large, barely 4 feet tall, but it was perfect. A bronze sculpture of a German Shepherd pup standing alone in the middle of a dirt road, one paw slightly lifted, ears tilted forward, eyes gazing into the imagined headlights of an unseen vehicle. His stance wasn't one of fear, it was defiance, courage. Below it, a plaque read, "To the little one who dared to stop traffic to save a life."
Jack stood beside the statue that day in full uniform. Shadow sat at his side, now fully certified. Willow lay peacefully in the grass nearby, head on paws, her eyes half-lidded but watchful. Riley stood behind them, arms crossed, sunglasses hiding her eyes but not the smile on her lips. No speeches were made, no music played, just a few quiet claps, and the sound of the wind moving through the pines, like the forest itself had paused to honor the moment. Jack looked down at Shadow. "You started all this," he whispered. And for just a second, the dog lifted his chin, closed his eyes, and let the breeze run through his fur like it belonged there. By the time summer touched Timber Ridge, something had shifted. Not just in the weather, in the town. People had always known the mountains held secrets, tales of hunters and hikers, of bears crossing trails, of owls blinking from high branches. But since the night a three-legged mother defended her son against a man with a blade, stories weren't just whispered anymore. They were shared. They were believed. Every Thursday morning, Jack Dalton and Shadow visited Timber Ridge Elementary. It had started with one invitation from a fourth-grade teacher who had seen the article in the local paper. K9 and his mother defend officer, capture poacher. She thought it might inspire her students. It did more than that. Jack showed up in uniform, Shadow in his harness. Willow came to her limp, kept her mostly near the edge of the classroom rug, lying on a folded quilt in the sun. The children circled around her like she was a living monument. And Shadow? He stood at Jack's side the entire time, eyes always scanning the room until a child raised a hand. Then when Jack gave the signal, Shadow would trot forward, sit, and offer his paw. The room always fell silent when that happened, because even kids could feel it. This wasn't a trick. It was a gift. Later that week, Jack sat with Dr. Nora Whitman at the Wildlife Center. The two of them had developed a quiet ritual Friday evenings on the clinic porch. 2 mugs of strong tea, the buzz of insects, the slow exhale of another week survived. "Shadow's different," Nora said that night. Jack nodded. "He always was." "No, I mean, he listens differently. Like he's hearing something deeper." She took a slow sip. "He doesn't just sense pain. He responds to it." The Wildlife Center had seen a spike in calls, wounded fawns, trapped foxes, an injured eagle with a broken wing. Jack and Shadow responded to everyone, sometimes with Riley Moore, sometimes alone, sometimes with Willow, who, despite her injury, insisted on riding along, always situating herself where she could see the trail, her eyes never still. Jack started keeping a notebook. Dates, locations, conditions, but also Shadow's reaction, his posture, the way his ears moved when they approached a site, how he lingered near some trees but ignored others. By the 3rd week, Jack was convinced Shadow wasn't just detecting movement, he was detecting suffering. One evening, the team was called out to the Western Ridge. A hiker had heard animal cries near a thicket of broken pine, thought maybe a coyote was stuck. When Jack and Shadow arrived, it was near dusk. The air smelled like ash, an old fire, maybe a lightning strike days ago. The ground was soft with mud. Willow stayed in the truck. Shadow leapt down and froze. His ears perked, head tilted, then he moved. Not fast, carefully. Like someone entering a sacred place. 20 yards in, they found it. A raccoon, maybe a year old, caught in a wire snare buried beneath rotted leaves. The wire had cut deep. The animal was barely breathing. Shadow didn't bark. He simply sat beside it, close but not touching. Jack moved in, clipped the wire, wrapped the wound with gauze. All the while, Shadow stayed still, not as a dog on alert, but as a presence, like the raccoon wouldn't leave the world alone. They brought it back to the center. Nora took one look and sighed. "It's bad. Might not survive the night." Shadow stood outside the door. All night. At dawn,
The raccoon stirred. Jack didn't say a word. He just looked down at his partner and whispered, "You knew." Word started to spread, not just about Shadow, but about the quiet changes. People in Timber Ridge, who used to shrug off injured strays, now stopped their cars. Hikers who once walked past limp-legged deer now called the center. The town didn't change overnight, but it changed, and at the heart of it stood a dog who never asked for attention. He just listened and acted. One afternoon, Riley handed Jack a letter. It was from a statewide search and rescue program. They'd read the reports. They wanted Shadow to train with their trauma response canine division. Jack looked down at the form. He didn't hesitate. He just smiled, rubbed the dog's ears, and said, "Looks like we're not done yet, kid." The letter came stamped with the state seal. Inside, a single line. Requesting K9 47 for deployment wildfire trauma zone, Clearwater County. Jack Dalton stood by the cabin window as he read it, fingers curled loosely around a mug of coffee gone cold. Outside, Shadow was sitting at the tree line, back straight, ears up, watching the woods. He hadn't moved in over 10 minutes. Jack didn't need to ask why. Somewhere far from Timber Ridge, something was wrong. And Shadow already knew. The fire had ripped through Clearwater County like a blade fast, erratic, cruel. 3,000 acres burned in under 48 hours, dozens of homes destroyed. Families displaced, animals scattered or lost. By the time Jack and Shadow arrived with the K9 rescue unit, the smoke still hung low over the valley like grief refusing to lift. People whispered, not about the blaze, but about the dog with one working ear, no pedigree, and eyes like old smoke. They didn't understand him. Not yet. But they would. The first sight was a horse ranch reduced to ash, nothing but charred fencing and a twisted weather vane still turning in the breeze. The owners, an elderly couple, stood by the ruins, clutching each other like they were the only solid things left in the world. Their voices were hoarse, their eyes swollen. They'd lost everything. But their granddaughter kept asking the same question. "Where's Biscuit?" A dog. Part terrier. Old. Deaf. Last seen in the barn before the fire jumped the ridge. No one had the heart to answer her, until Shadow moved. He walked past the wreckage. No barking, no hesitation. He sniffed the air, circled the debris, and stopped near a collapsed water trough. Then he sat, still. Alert. Jack rushed forward, dropping to his knees. There beneath a sheet of warped aluminum was a small nose, moving, alive. They pulled Biscuit out, trembling but unharmed, eyes wide with disbelief. The little girl screamed his name and dropped to the ground beside him, tears falling in streaks. Shadow stood back and watched. And when the girl looked up and whispered, "Thank you," he blinked once and turned away. Already listening for the next sound. They found 6 more animals that week. A golden retriever under a collapsed bridge, 2 goats hiding in a drained culvert, a barn cat with scorched paws curled inside a mailbox. Each time, Shadow found them. Not with barking, not with sniffing frantically, but by sensing presence, suffering where no one else thought to look. One morning, a paramedic pulled Jack aside. "Your dog," he said, eyes still wide. "He doesn't react like the others. He waits, watches, like he's reading the ground." Jack nodded. "He is. What's he reading?" Jack looked out at the hills where Shadow was walking just ahead of Willow, who had come along, quiet and watchful as ever. "Pain," Jack said simply. "And whether or not, it wants to be found." That evening, Shadow refused to enter the tent. Instead, he lay beside the burn perimeter, eyes trained on a smoldering ridgeline. Jack brought him water. "Tomorrow, huh?" he whispered. Shadow didn't move, but his ears turned slightly at the sound of Jack's voice. On the final day of the mission, a crew member found a fawn, lying beside a pond, barely breathing, singed, alone. They brought it back to base camp. Shadow stood beside it all night, nose an inch from its flank. When it twitched once, then again, and finally blinked, everyone around the campfire fell silent. No one said a word, because they all knew. It wasn't medicine that had brought it back. It was presence. It was the silence that said, "I see you. I'm here. Keep breathing." When they returned to Timber Ridge, the town welcomed them not with fanfare, but with stillness. People stood on porches, nodded, removed their hats. They didn't cheer, because how do you cheer for something that's sacred? You simply acknowledge it. Later that night, Jack sat with Riley Moore at the edge of the cabin porch. Shadow and Willow lay near the steps, curled in mirrored shapes, mother and son, now protectors of more than just each other. Riley spoke softly. "He doesn't just save animals, Jack. He gives people permission to believe again." Jack nodded, then said something he'd never said out loud. "That night, I wasn't supposed to be on that road. I was just driving, trying to run from guilt, and then there he was, standing in the middle of it. A pup, alone, not lost. Waiting." He looked at Shadow. "Turns out, I wasn't the one who found him." Riley smiled. "He found you." The sky over Timber Ridge cracked open just after midnight, not with thunder, with a phone call. Jack Dalton sat upright in bed, the receiver pressed to his ear, heart already racing. "We've got movement near the northern fence line," Riley's voice said. Security cam picked up a figure, no vehicle, heavy coat, backpack. "Could be nothing. Or it could be him," Jack replied. "Ray Sutter, the poacher they thought they had put behind them for good. He'd been released on technicalities after a procedural error, now under watch, but not behind bars. And ever since, he'd vanished again into the tree line like a ghost who'd learned to wait." Jack didn't have time to dress in full uniform. He grabbed his coat, checked the revolver, and whistled once. Shadow came running. His eyes were sharp, body taut, muscles lean and ready. Willow too stirred. She stood slowly, favoring her left side, then limped to the door and looked back at Jack. "You're not staying behind, are you?" he asked softly. She didn't move. She didn't need to. Jack opened the door. The three of them stepped into the storm. Snow hadn't started yet, but the wind was cold and fast. Riley met them at the forest edge, rifle slung, breath visible in short bursts. He passed camera 2 at 2:11 a.m., still walking west. Toward the old ridge. Jack felt his stomach drop. The old ridge was where it had all started, where Willow had nearly died, where Shadow had first drawn his line in the snow. They moved fast through the trees, boots crunching softly, flashlights low. Willow kept up as best she could, her limp more pronounced now, but her gaze never wavering. She remembered this ground. So did Shadow. He surged ahead until he stopped, suddenly, instantly. Low growl. Head forward, tail stiff. Jack raised his hand. Everyone froze. Then a click. A metallic one. A sound Jack knew far too well. A trap had been reset, and someone was standing right beside it. They moved in together, and there he was, Ray Sutter. Bigger now, beard wilder, his eyes somehow colder. He held a rusted trap in one hand, a machete in the other. "You just don't learn, do you?" he said. Jack didn't speak. Didn't flinch. Shadow stepped in front of him. Ray sneered. "Still hiding behind dogs." That's when Willow limped forward and stood beside her son. 3 legs. No fear. Ray lunged. It happened fast, too fast to process. Jack shouted. Riley fired a warning shot. Ray turned sharply toward the sound, and Shadow leapt. The two collided mid-air. Shadow slammed into Ray's chest, driving him backward, teeth bared, but the man still had the trap,
and with one wild swing, he brought it down. Metal clanged. A yelp followed. Then silence. Ray hit the ground. The trap skidded into the brush. Riley was on him in seconds, pinning him down, cuffing him hard and fast. Jack dropped to his knees. Shadow lay in the snow, breathing fast, paw twisted unnaturally. Blood on his shoulder, but still conscious, still looking toward Willow. She limped to him immediately and lay down beside him, pressing her head to his. No sound, just presence. Back at the Wildlife Center, Dr. Nora Whitman moved faster than Jack had ever seen her. Shadow was stable. The wound missed vital arteries. But the leg would never be the same. "He's going to walk," she said, breathless. But like her, Jack glanced toward Willow, resting quietly nearby. Not defeated, adapted. He knelt beside Shadow, who was sedated now, heartbeat steady. "You bought us time," Jack whispered. "You always do." Word spread fast, not about Sutter's return, but about what Shadow did, what he gave, what he risked, what he refused to let happen again. That night, people in Timber Ridge left lights on their porches, not for safety, for honor. 3 days later, the two dogs were released together. Shadow wore a brace now lightweight, custom fit. He walked slower, but he walked. And Willow? She didn't leave his side. For the first time, Jack saw it clearly. This wasn't just a family. This was a legacy. One born in snow, tested in fire, and written in the silent loyalty of those who choose to stand even when they fall. The snow had finally melted. Spring arrived in Timber Ridge, not with fanfare, but with quiet awakenings. New buds on ash trees, soft soil beneath tired paws, and at the heart of it all, a bronze statue rising on the town square. It wasn't large. It wasn't grand, but every detail mattered. A pup with one ear flopped, standing tall beside a dog with a scarred leg. Shadow and Willow, mother and son, rescuers, survivors, legends. The idea had come from a child, the same little girl whose terrier, Biscuit, had been pulled from the wreckage weeks ago. She mailed a crayon drawing to the mayor's office. In the corner, she'd written in shaky letters, "Heroes don't always wear boots." The town council met the next day. No debate, no hesitation. They voted unanimously. On the day of the unveiling, Jack Dalton stood beside the cloth-covered sculpture, his uniform freshly pressed. He hadn't worn it since the day he was suspended, but now he wore it not for the badge, but for what it stood for. Beside him, Riley Moore adjusted the mic, eyes scanning the crowd. Children sat cross-legged near the front. Park rangers in green and brown lined the back. Reporters hovered respectfully at the edges, and at the center, resting side by side, were Shadow and Willow. No leashes, no commands, just presence. The mayor stepped up to speak. She told the story, from the night of the storm, to the trap in the woods, to the rescue missions in Clearwater. But then she paused. Sometimes the world changes not because of a law, but because a single heart refused to turn away. Then she turned to Jack. "Mr. Dalton, would you do the honors?" Jack took a deep breath and pulled the cloth away. Gasps, then silence, then soft clapping. A slow rise to standing, and as the last corner of cloth dropped to the ground, Jack spoke. "This isn't just about two dogs. It's about what they remind us. That loyalty doesn't ask for a reward, that courage doesn't wait for a command, and that sometimes the smallest creatures carry the biggest light." That night, Jack walked back to the cabin with both dogs at his side. Willow moved slower now, but with dignity. Shadow had adjusted to the brace. Sometimes he stumbled, but he never stopped. Inside, Jack lit a fire and placed an old photo on the mantel. It was faded, taken from a wildlife cam that first night when he found Shadow on the road, the pup's silhouette standing still, ears alert, waiting, not lost, calling. Weeks passed.
Then months. Tourists began arriving, not to snap selfies, but to volunteer, to help at the rescue center, to learn from Dr. Nora Whitman, to watch Shadow and Willow lead pups through trails, teaching them not with force, but with quiet leadership. Jack never turned anyone away, but he always said the same thing. If you're here to pet a hero, go to the statue. If you're here to become one, follow their example. One morning, Jack awoke to scratching at the door. He opened it to find a small, muddy puppy, wagging its tail and staring up with bright, hopeful eyes. Shadow walked out, looked at the pup, and sat beside it. Willow followed, nose twitching. The pup didn't move. It just leaned gently against Shadow's leg. Jack knelt down and smiled. "Another one, huh?" Shadow blinked once. Jack laughed softly. "Welcome home." The sign on the new gate read, "Timber Ridge Wildlife Haven, where every soul matters." And just beneath, etched in metal, "Dedicated to Shadow, Willow, and the ones who choose love over fear." In a world that often moves too fast, Shadow and Willow's story reminds us of the values we must hold on to: loyalty, quiet courage, and the healing power of love. Jack Dalton didn't rescue a dog that night in the storm. He was rescued from his own silence and sorrow. And that little pup, Shadow, didn't just grow into a hero. He became a bridge between a broken man and a wounded world. For older Americans who have weathered life's storms, this story resonates deeply. It tells us that no soul is ever too small to make a difference. That kindness isn't weakness, and strength isn't always loud. Sometimes redemption walks in on four legs. Sometimes healing begins with listening to the ones who can't speak. Whether you've worn a uniform, raised a family, or simply stood up for what was right, you know that true character shows up when no one is watching. That's what Willow did. That's what Shadow became. And it's what we can still become, no matter our age. So let this story be a quiet nudge. There's always someone human or not waiting for you to believe in them. Or to believe in yourself again. Hoy ChatGPT, top of form, bottom of form.